about the book of Daniel tonight? The book of Daniel. Chapter 1. All right, the book of Daniel, chapter 1, verse 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem, and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of God, and he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. And the king spake unto Asaphanes, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, and the king's seed, and of the princes, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored, and skillful in all wisdom, and cunning, and knowledge, and understanding, and science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and to whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat, and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Now among these were of the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names, for he gave unto Daniel the name of Belshazzar, and of Ananiah of Shadrach, and to Mishael of Meshach, and to Azariah of Abednego. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. And therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. And the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who hath appointed your meat and your drink, for why should he see your faces worse likened than the children which are of your sort? And then shall ye make me endanger my head to the king. Then said Daniel to Melchior, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat, and water to drink. And then let our countenance be looked upon before thee, and the countenance of the children that eat of the portion of the king's meat. And as thou seest, deal with thy servants. So he consented to them in this matter, and proved them 10 days. And at the end of 10 days their countenances were appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children which did eat the portion of the king's meat. And thus Melchior took away the portion of their meat and the wine that they should drink, and gave them pulse. Okay, I'm going to stop there. This is probably not the first time you've ever heard this story, but I think it's rather interesting that in the process of this being carried away, they want some young men of knowledge, some young men that will be good with science and with learning to come, and they're going to train them for these 3 years to stand before the king. And so when they bring them in, they say, well, we got to give them something to eat, so we're going to give them a portion of the king's meat, and we're going to give them the wine. Now, you have to understand that those people didn't just drink wine to be winos. They didn't just drink it to be alcoholics, but it is said that they drank that because they had to have something, because the water supply was not well. But I don't believe that all of the water supplies were not well. There were wells that had good water. So whatever the purpose was, they brought these young men in. And in the company of the eunuchs, and a eunuch is a man who he does not have a relationship with women at all. He is set aside And some men, the scripture says, I believe it was Paul's writing, that some men were eunuchs from their mother's womb, from their birth, but some were made eunuchs that way. And so that was something that they did. So for one thing, to be sure that if he took care of the king's harem, he wasn't taking care of the king's harem.
Right. Amen.
And so they made sure that he had no drive in him at all for that kind of a situation, that kind of a relationship. But this man was in charge of these young men as they came in, and they found favor in his sight. But he knew that if he didn't do what the king had commanded or what was told him to do, that he would end up losing his life, and it would be his head that would be on the platter. And so when these fellas, and don't you find that it's kind of ironic that when we talk about, and when the scripture talks about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, it uses the names of the original names that they had. Here they are names that are trying to change or trying to be changed. And when we look at this scripture, Daniel's name remains Daniel. Of course, they changed it to Belshazzar. But when we're looking at it, what we always go back to Daniel and the three Hebrew boys, or the three Hebrew children, or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We've learned little songs, we're taught of this, and we know on in the book that they are cast into the fire. But right now, this is all four of them. And as they all four stand here, Daniel speaks up and says, I'm not going to eat the king's meat. So he purposed it in his heart. That was a decision that he had to make. Yeah. You know, if you look around in churches, you will see, this is one thing that I told Teresa, and I told some other ministers we talked before I came back here and started to pastor here. One thing that I knew would be the biggest battle for me being a pastor is the lack of people's not only enthusiasm about being in the house of God, but their lack of commitment to the house of God, because there are so many other things. So if you ever hear me praying, God send trouble their way, what I'm actually saying is, God, let them know that there's more important things than running around doing everything you want to do. But if you will be rooted and grounded in God, you not only will be a blessing to the church, will be a blessing to the people you're around, but it'll be a blessing to you years later. What's the sense in saying I'm a Christian and never attending church and never benefiting from the things of God, and then one day you will find yourself so empty because you've squandered the time that you could have. I wonder how many people could watch this tonight. And it has been said, from this pulpit, that there are people that just can't make it sometimes. And I believe there are people that just can't make it sometimes, but I also believe there are people that can make it everywhere else, and they were at Walmart, they were here, they were there, so I don't buy all that. You just can't. I understand that if there's something you want to do, you will do it. So what makes an old, mature Christian an old, mature Christian? Time. Right? I mean, maturity comes with eating the Word and learning, but time. So when you first get saved, you say, well, I want to be like brother so-and-so, or I want to be like sister so-and-so. Okay, live for 30 years and see if you get to be like them. Yeah. It takes time. Not. Well, I started going to church last week, and I gave my heart to the Lord last week. And this week some trouble came, and I don't think I'll go this week. Or a month down the road. No, I don't think so. You know, I watch people, and I see the experiences that they go through, and I think, you know, the only way to be an old Christian is hang on. Just hang on. Life is life, and it's going to smack you in the face with everything it's got. And one of the worst things, of course, is death. And the closer the person is to you, the more that death of that loved one hurts you. And for some people, it brings them closer to God. But you know what happens with some people? They walk away. It drives them farther away from God. They can't understand how God could take their husband, or how God could take their wife, or how God could take their grandparents, and they hold that grudge against God. And I guess if you're going to have an excuse, if there's any, you think you got a pretty good one in that. Well, I'm mad at God because he took dad. I'm mad at God because he took mom. I like to just turn it around. I talk to people sometimes in counseling, when counseling somebody that has lost someone that they love. I said, you know, why do we have to say God took them? Why can't we say God received them?
Yeah.
You see, you look at it a little different when you say He received them, because they're sick. And if they're dying with the disease, you could look down and say, God, why did you take them? No, God knew they were dying, and so He received them. If you look at what happened from the Adam and Eve sin in the garden, God said, you're not going to live to be 150 years old any longer. And although men was meant to live forever, they would have lived forever. Now He says, this curse is going to bring an end to your physical life. So it does sound kind of harsh sometimes, but we all leave.
Yeah.
You'll get slapped in the face with the death of a loved one. You'll get slapped in the face by the devil with everything he can throw at you. Your children.
Yeah.
Oh, somebody I was talking to the other day, and they don't have to tell me about problems with children. I'm a preacher's kid. I am by nature, even without being a preacher's kid, I'm a problem child. I just am. I have been my whole life. And so I understand that. I don't say that humbly. Ask my wife. She'll support everything I'm telling you. She's Teresa Vastine. She's not paid for this message, but she supports it. That's just who I am. And I have to, after forgiveness from God, I have to allow God to show me, to mold me, to teach me, to keep my mouth quiet sometimes when I shouldn't say. And it's very difficult for me. If somebody steps on me, I like to step back. It's a very difficult thing, but it is something that can be done. And how can you be a mature, older Christian if you give up when you're a young Christian? These were young men. And these young men, they could have said, sure, we'll take whatever you got. They could have got together, all four of them, and said, look, boys, this is better than anything we had to eat back home. But they didn't. Daniel knew the significance of it being the king's meat. He knew that we have just come from our country, from our nation. We have been taken hostage. Here we are, and now they're wanting to fatten us up so we can do their work. He says, God's good enough for me.
Amen.
And He is good enough. He's good enough for all of us.
Yeah.
So what happens then? Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat. Wasn't something that that God had blessed, and so he determines that. Years ago, my dad, when he would go out to church and sing and stuff, I started singing with him, and there was a song that he had learned from someone. He wanted me to learn it, and a part of the song, and I remember songs real well, but the only way I remember a portion of this is because I have a little piece of it written down. Maybe if I go back through my mind, it could jog my memory. But the song says, Satan paints a rosy picture. Has he deceived you today? And it's talking about a young person, how that Satan paints this picture of how this will be so good if you do this. Now, you probably heard it said before, but you could look at the billboard of the woman laying all stretched out there, and she's got a bottle of wine or a bottle of whiskey or a bottle of booze, and how Satan just paints to look like the good life. This is what you should be doing. This is what you should have. Or the picture of the friends in the bar having a good time and everything's great. But then it never shows you the backside of that billboard where the person's down on Skid Row puking their guts up. They're an alcoholic. Their family has left them. The wife's packed the kids and left and gone. Maybe they've done time somewhere where they shouldn't have. All because Satan painted this nice picture. And that person is drug around like a pig with a hook in their nose. And they'll go anywhere. Anywhere. But when you get saved, there's a difference. Hook comes out. Right? Shackles come off. I mean, if you're born again and you still got handcuffs of Satan on you, you're not born again. You need to be free. And the free comes from believing in Him, putting our faith and our hope and our confidence in Him. And I'm not saying you can't bind yourself. Yes, you can, but you don't belong to Satan anymore, so he can't bind you without your permission. And so the shackles fall off, and we are new people. And we may have desired the things of the world at one time. And I'm not telling you you won't live, and you don't live in the flesh in a world full of temptations. But somewhere along the line, being forgiven and wanting to please our God, we refuse certain things that come along. Daniel purposed in his heart. He determined that he would not defile himself. He determined within himself that he would not defile himself. And you know what? I'll give you just an example, at least one example, of someone who loved God with all of his heart and was the apple of God's eye. But if David, when it was time for all kings to go to war, if David would have went to war and purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself, he would never have committed adultery with Bathsheba. So somewhere, even people of God can be tempted and can fall. We've got the purpose in our hearts that I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to listen to what Satan has. I'm not going to eat what he's got to force me. I'm going to go with what God has. And what God has doesn't look as appetizing. Now, I don't know about you. I'd rather have a big steak than a big salad. That's just me. And some people say, I like to have them both together. Well, if we ever go out and you order a big steak and a big salad for me, I can eat the steak, you can have the salad. I like to eat them every once in a while, but if you're giving me a choice, well, this is the choice, the king's meat or Paul's. And you know what Satan would like to do then? He'd like to ugly up that picture. Paws. Ugh. Weeds. Ugh. Disgusting. Look what I have to offer, Satan says. Versus, look. And maybe you don't agree with this, but this is just my observation as being a Christian for years. With music, I played bluegrass gospel for years with some guys who we had the mandolin, the banjo, the bass, all that stuff. We went to a couple of kind of outdoor festivals, and people, and even bluegrass music has on CDs, a lot of CDs or old albums, it is religious music, Christian music, gospel music, however you want to look at it. It is a big part of old country and bluegrass. But men love darkness rather than light. And so you go to Rocky Fork Lake and they're having a big bluegrass festival out there. People ain't coming to listen to a bunch of gospel. They want to hear what they want to hear. And so even with someone who is born again, even with someone who is a Christian, Satan likes to play this. Look at what I have to offer with my music and my movies and my goods and all this versus what you guys got over there. Do Lord, oh, do Lord, oh, do remember me. What in the world do you have to offer over there? These movies that don't even make it to the cinema because they don't have enough financial backing. What do you have? And he tries to paint the picture that following the Lord is for what people in some generations here would have said years ago is for squares. What my generation would say maybe is for losers. Following the Lord. Surely you're not going to do that. There's nothing interesting there. You know, here's the funny thing about preaching is, because the things I say, some of those places I have been. And for me to walk away from going down to the local distribution center in our hometown and sitting on the stool and talking to my buddies, and then being converted and coming away from that life. No one that's ever there now can tell me they can't get out because you can. Yes. Somebody will say, well, you weren't as bad as me. And granted, I wasn't, but you weren't as bad as the next guy either. And it goes on and on and on. If we want to stand up and have a contest, you know, well, when I was, before I was a Christian, I used to drink a 6-pack a day. And the next guy get up. Before I was a Christian, I used to drink a 12-pack a day. And the next guy, I used to drink a keg a day. You know, you can keep having those little contests. And what does it matter? What are you trying to do? Prove how bad you were before you got saved? But in all of that, no matter what it is that has held you down, there's always hope for you because God has delivered someone else from that. Now, I don't know if you all are catching what's happened here, but we've got in our congregation, this young family has come, and not to put him on the spot, but he's already there, and he probably knows it. He's sitting in a church of older folks. Most all of us are older than they are. And I'm listening to songs tonight and thinking, okay, Mr. Thomas, take that one. File that away. And I'm listening to testimonies of a sister saying, in 1951 I was saved, and right over from her is a young man that I'm thinking, as I sit here and watching her testify and watching his face, I'm thinking, okay, Mr. Thomas, file that one away. For when Satan comes and says you'll never make it another day, that's probably the same thing he told her when she was saved in 1951, and here she is still what? Happy all the way. So it can happen. So when it is said that you'll never make it, everybody in here has made it, right? For a while, right? We weren't just saved yesterday, right? Not all of us. And so how do we make it? We just keep going. We grow. We learn. We do and we don't. Like I preached this morning, do's and don'ts. You hunger and thirst after righteousness. You are filled. You lay aside the things that God says lay aside. And then you make decisions like this. He purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself. Amen. So he says, I'm not doing it. What was that crazy woman on Facebook? I'm not having it. I'm not doing it. I ain't whatever. Yeah, just purpose it in your heart. I'm not doing it. And the world says, look at this, George. I'm telling you, David would have been much better off. He'd have stood up on that rooftop and looked over there and saw Bathsheba. And he would have backed away and said, God, please forgive me. And he would have called his servants and said, get my horse ready. Get my armor ready. I'm going where I need to be. If he would have purposed in his heart just to do what he should have done. But he didn't. He didn't have to because he was king, right? And it got him in trouble. Even kings can fall. And so, what did they do? Bring the pulse. This little Ethiopian, this little eunuch guy comes in and he says, not the Ethiopian eunuch, that's a different guy, but this little eunuch comes in and he says, now, he says, you're supposed to be eating this meat and drinking this wine, and Daniel says, we don't want to do it. And he says, I promise you, he said, you just put us to a 10-day test, and you feed all these young people the same thing. He said, but you let us eat what we are used to eating, what has been prepared for us. You let us eat that, and I guarantee you, we will be better shape than the other ones. And 10 days later, guess what? They were. There's proof in it. You watch people. What ages people? Troubles, kids, children, lifestyle. It ages people, doesn't it? I mean, you know, I'm not going to get on that too much because we are a society that just really goes too much on looks. If none of us could see anything, we'd all be beautiful and we'd like one another a little better maybe. But when we look, you may look at me and say, ugh. You know, but what age is someone? If you see someone, we didn't make it. We had a family reunion yesterday in our service here, but they were saying they were having a reunion of some of the folks from Northwest were having a reunion. Well, when you see people, pictures of people, and you look at them and say, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? Wow, they lived a rough life. Wow. One too many cigarettes. You know, it does something to your skin. It does. It just, you know, puckers, gives you the little lines around your. One too many Twinkies. It just does something to you. It does. Trust me. One too many bottles. One too many. And life is what shapes and molds and makes. So the final presentation, when you're brought up and ready to be put in the box at the end of life, you may find someone that's 80 years old versus someone that's 50 years old, and they look alike because one lived a clean life before God, and a 50-year-old lived like Hank Williams Jr. told him to live. All out, just went for everything. And I think sometimes Satan is laughing, and somewhere there's someone saying, you big dummy. Do you not know that there's hell waiting for you?
Right.
Turn around. Yeah. And what about the people in hell today? If you were to look at the scripture where Lazarus is said by the rich man, he says, send Lazarus back to tell my 5 brothers not to come to this awful place. And what if there were folks in hell today saying to you, don't come here?
Amen. That's right.
Well, the life we live sometimes gives us an appearance and changes us and makes us and forms us and shapes us. And you defile yourself with the king's meat. This is just a terminology, but you defile yourself with the things of Satan, and it will show on you. You say, I really don't care what I look like. Well, I'm just telling you, it will not only show on you, but it'll show in you, and it'll show out from you, and it'll show all your family. So when you give it to God, give it to God. Yeah. Just give it to Him. Yeah. Purpose in your heart, I'm not going to live like that any longer. I'll never forget the first time that somebody said to me, you're a Christian, right? Yes. Proud to say it. Yes, I am. What do you think about doing this? And they named off some thing that I did and other people no doubt did. They wanted to know. And then before I could ever get out what I thought of it anyhow, they said, we got a deacon in our church that does that. He got a whole 6-pack of them, and then you go to visit him, and he wants to pop you a cap and say, here, drink one. And I'm saying to you that when you become born again, if there are things that would defile you, the things that are defiled from the world, but would defile the witness that you have, you don't need those things.
Right. Amen.
You don't need those.
Yeah.
Oh, no, you want to take away all the fun. You want to save your life. What we want to do, save your witness before God for everybody that watches. Know that when we say there's power in the blood, that people don't look and say, where? I don't see it. You're not living like there's power, but there is power.
Yeah.
There's power to walk this walk. Don't ever get religious. Please don't ever get religious. Religious people get mean and hateful, and they just get set in their ways. And you walk into a church that is nothing but religious, and that's not a place I'm really ever want to be. But do mature in the Lord. Do grow. Do flourish. Do just look. And as Sister Della said this morning, have you ever given any thought, she said, what if this is my last day here? What if this is my last chance in my church to give God praise for what He's done for me? Well, I will say to all of you that weren't saved last night right up here, and you know who you are, and we do too. We have young people that are watching us. We have young Christians that are watching us.
Amen.
Present yourself before God. Purpose that you're not going to defile yourself with the junk of this world. Live it out for Him. And give those people hope that, hey, if that brother or that sister can make it, I can make it too. I will leave you with this, but there was a pretty popular preacher that fell through a mess back in the late 70s. And my dad had a lot of confidence in that man. And when he fell, I was just a kid, but I remember him saying to my mother, if a man like that can't make it, I don't have a chance. But let me tell you something, that's not true. Because men are men and women are women. And if a man like that would have purposed in his heart, not just from his mouth, why he's preaching revival after revival after revival. Because let me tell you something, when you get busy for God, Satan attacks you with everything he's got. Don't you ever look at these preachers, I don't care who they are, running the highways, jumping on the jet planes, going here, going there, thinking, man, they got it made. I'm telling you what, they can have it.
Amen.
Because in that, Satan fights and he comes with everything he's got. And it's not the strong that survive.
Right.
It's that person that just says, I ain't having it.
Yeah.
You keep the king's meat. I don't want that. Bring me the salad. Bring me the angel food, right? Bring me what God says. I'll show you. So what did they do? They came back and looked, and those 4 young men were better shaped than the ones that were eating steak with A1 sauce on it. Yeah, they were. They were better shaped. Why? because they weren't partaking of the king's meat, and they purposed in their heart. And once they did that, God rewarded them. Our Sunday school lesson said this morning about God rewarding us for doing what He has for us to do. Amen. God rewarded them. He gave them strength. He gave them substance. He gave them what they needed. He will give it to us today, right? Stand with me if you will. Maybe you're here tonight with a need. Sister Connie, you don't have to come tonight. But as we stand here and just take a few moments, if you're here and you'd like to pray,